Hello, you're watching TVP World Talks. I'm Ila Shlebiński. Ukraine is facing a challenging moment as the lack of US-made Patriot interceptors exposed the nation's civilians to relentless Russian attacks. Russia is also trying to choke off Ukraine's grain exports by attacking the seaport in Odessa. At the same time, Ukraine has made an impressive effort to bring the war into Russia itself by damaging Moscow's oil revenues and more recently placing a strain on Russian logistics. But as winter draws nearer, can Ukraine survive without a major change in the attitude of its allies? Joining us here today is Yevheniia Kravchuk, Deputy Chair of the Ukrainian Committee on Humanitarian and Information Policy. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Thank you for having me.
So what do you think is going to happen now? Will Ukraine be able to obtain some defense measures against what Russia has been doing during the last few days, which, let's face it, it is very much tantamount to terrorism, attacking civilians with ballistic missiles, because Russia knows that Ukraine has more and more problems defending itself against this very type of attacks.
Well, Russia had been attacking Ukrainian civilians since 2022, and last year and this year has the record high numbers of losses among civilians. If you compare the situation, I would say it looks like 2022 when the full-scale invasion started and Ukraine had a very limited capacities at that time. But what had changed is the numbers of missiles we get almost every night. If you say about numbers, I have some from July. So in July, Ukraine was attacked with 195 ballistic missiles. Ballistics is the ultrasound is very fast, and it could be intercepted only by a special types of air defense, which is Patriot systems. And because of the lack of these systems and missiles to it, only 29 were intercepted. And if you take the cruise missiles, which are also very damaging, but there are other types of air defense that can intercept them. We intercepted 187 out of 265. So these are huge numbers. If you remember the numbers from the war in the Middle East, you would get these numbers, in probably all of the duration of the attack, and we get this only in 1 month. And again, it also influences, as you rightfully mentioned, the export, because the 3 ports in Odessa region, in so-called Big Odessa, also need to be protected if there is a ballistics. And since 2022, we had the same situation when they were blocked. We had for some time the grain corridor that was sort of negotiated together with Turkey and United Nations, but then Russia stepped out, and with our own missiles, we were able to push the Russian fleet to basically the Novorossiysk ports and Georgian ports. Now that
which was a great success, right? I mean, because before we go on to the question of the grain trade and how Russia is essentially trying to prevent Ukraine from using its own resources, right? Let's go back to the missile question for a moment. Do you think that Ukraine's allies are doing enough? What do you think about the whole discussion about the licensing of missile production, with Trump first promising that Ukraine would be given that license, later on seemingly walking back, at least partially, casting doubt over that statement that he had made before, saying that this is a very sophisticated weapon and he doesn't know whether the US can actually hand out the license to manufacture this. And also, what about other countries? Can you see any other sources of these missiles? Because it is a very dangerous situation, especially for Ukrainian civilians, because clearly Russia can see this window of opportunity and is attacking civilian targets on a day-to-day basis.
And also, it's although it's still August, we're dragging closer to winter, and especially big cities, they are dependent on the big infrastructure plants that produce hot water for the heating. So basically, if we will not be able to protect these big infrastructure objects in big cities, meaning that millions of people that do not have decentralized source of heating or a wood stove, because you cannot have a wood stove in the apartment.
So it's a humanitarian crisis, right?
Apartments.
There is a risk of a humanitarian crisis.
And that's what Putin seeks to cause the humanitarian crisis, because he doesn't have a success on the ground. As you know, the time limits to occupy the whole Donetsk region were pushed, 20 times probably, but still no success. So the only instrument they have left are the ballistics and the missiles, because we cannot intercept them because of the shortage of the missiles. Now about what we can do, and there are two tracks. One track is, of course, the longer one is the procurement and producing the needed missiles. That means obtaining the license, as you mentioned, from United States, and we're still, apparently working on it, because President Trump had said things that were different if you look on the time scale, but it's not the closed question, right? So it's the work in progress. Another thing is having European anti-ballistic system, because it's not just us, it's all of the countries are dependent on the production of these missiles by United States. And also we have the Middle East countries that used a lot of these missiles during the war in Iran, meaning that they're also in this queue waiting to refill the stocks. Again, it is the longer process, and for Ukraine, time matters. So we're right now seeking and we're negotiating with different countries that have the missiles in their stocks. We also have the contracts already signed, and we will get some since January. But before January, we need to refill these stocks and then, replace with those that will be coming in the new year. So I would say this urgency is what we can get from the partners right now, because it's everyday damage that will cause people, freezing or being killed every night.
Right, but this is an urgency that, Ukraine appreciates this urgency. Perhaps Ukraine's neighbors appreciate this urgency. But what about other countries further westward in Europe? Weren't you a bit disappointed last year when, the Russian attacks have left massive parts of Kyiv itself without power in the middle of winter? So that, again, was a situation that was moving dangerously close to a humanitarian catastrophe. But there didn't seem to be too many decisive measures taken by Ukraine's allies. Do you think it's going to be different this year, when this threat is already looming and we can already see what Putin will be trying to do? Do you think that some countries might actually release their stocks, those who still have these missiles?
Well, hopefully, and we're not talking just of the Western Europe, but also Southern Europe. For example, Greece has a significant number of the missiles in stock. So, as I said, there are negotiations with different countries right now, and we just had a few days ago a big meeting of all of the ambassadors of Ukraine that work in different countries, and President Zelensky clearly stated that the result of the work of the ambassador will be measured in amount of the missiles that could be brought to Ukraine. So, all of the diplomatic teams and President Zelensky himself are concentrated on this idea. And also, as I mentioned, the development of European anti-ballistic system, Freya, we have a whole coalition on that, is extremely important as well, because because that means that European producers will be self-sufficient and European continent will be self-sufficient. And also Ukraine is developing not just our own ballistics, because we're working on the long-range sanctions, as we call it, on Russian territory, but also our own anti-ballistics. But it takes time, it takes money, and also Russia is targeting the producers of weapons in Ukraine as well.
So can you see any other options? And, it's not just about, the missile defense, but also about stopping the Russian attacks, for example, on Ukraine's capacity to export grain, which also threatens food security in many parts of the world. Perhaps there could be a way for Ukraine's allies to provide more offensive measures to target Russian weapons manufacturers. Do you think that this could be the way to put even more pressure on Russia itself? Because we're still going to see, Russia being a member of the UN Security Council committing war crimes. And apart from, of course, the support that Ukraine is getting, the sanctions, but some measures could still be applied, which so far have not seen the light of day, so to say.
Well, of course, and I think it's the complex of measures. It's also the sanctions on the war chest, right? So Russia would not be getting the money to build these missiles or to function the country. And in the recent months, Ukrainian attack on oil refineries and Russian capacities had dropped the export in 25%, meaning that 25% less money will be flowing to Russian budget. And at the same time, Russia had started to import gasoline for the inner purposes, which had happened, for the first time in probably the lifetime of independent Russian Federation, which, puts a big pressure on Russian economy and Russian budget. And of course, the sanctions on the way Russia still gets Western technologies, because if you look on the missile, it's not manufactured in Russia. It's actually, they use, of course, a lot of the parts that were produced in Asia and in China, but also they're still smuggling, basically, the Western, electronics, sometimes of a dual use, sometimes through third countries. And with each sanction package, we're closing these loopholes to basically make the production of these missiles, if not impossible, then in much lesser numbers. And if you look on the date in which these missiles that hit Ukraine are being manufactured, they're very fresh. It's not the stocks. It's basically what they make, they send immediately.
So their supply is not infinite and could be susceptible to further pressure from Ukraine's allies. Hopefully this is going to happen sooner or later, but as you said, time is of the essence. Yevheniia Kravchuk was our guest today here on TVP World. Thank you very much for joining us and for sharing your insight.
Thank you for having me.
And I'm Jonasz Rewinski. You're watching TVP World. Stay with us for more latest news, updates and commentary.